Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting, this electronic meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. I invite everybody to join Council in O Canada. Thank you, everybody. Madam Clerk, we're all present. We have no regrets. Councillor, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Knoll? One minute, Councillor Knoll, while the clerks find out how to unmute you. There you go. Go ahead.
Is that better? Okay. I have a pecuniary interest in item 3, the recommendation number 3 in that matter with respect to the Kerr Street Village Business Improvement Area. I am a director and shareholder of a corporation that is a member of that business improvement area, and as such, I would absent myself from the vote.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone else? Madam Clerk, that's all the declarations I saw. All right. Our council and committee meetings are currently being held by video conference and live streamed onto our website. This is the first council meeting that we have members of the public participating electronically. We have a bylaw on this agenda to amend our procedure bylaw to allow for public electronic delegation participation. However, until this bylaw is approved by council, I need a motion to waive procedure to allow members of the public to participate electronically at the council meeting. Councillor Lischina and Councillor Sanju, thank you. We need a 2/3 vote to carry this. All those in favor, show your hands, please. And that is unanimous. Thank you. The motion that in accordance with section 2.2 of the procedure bylaw, the rules of procedure established in section 12.2 be waived to allow members of the public to participate electronically at this meeting. That has carried. Now, if you're watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to an item on our agenda, there will be information posted on your screen below the live stream on how to call into the live meeting. When you call in, you will be placed in a virtual waiting room, and when I poll for delegations, you will press *9 on your phone's keypad to raise your hand and advise the clerk that you wish to speak at the appropriate time. If you have pre-registered and you are participating by video conference, there's also a feature on the lower the lower left of your screen to click and by that click, raise your hand when you wish to speak to an item. Please remember that there's a slight delay between the live meeting and what is live streamed, and for that reason, when I poll the virtual participants for requests to delegate, there may be a lag time that we will accommodate to give participants time to virtually raise their hands to let our clerk staff know that they're ready to speak. So there may be slight pauses in the technical process of this meeting, and the appropriate remedy for that is everybody's good-natured patience. So thank you for that in advance. The next item before us is the confirmation of the minutes of the previous council meetings the regular session on April 23rd, and the closed session on April 23rd. May I have a mover for that? Councillor O'Meara, would you accommodate us with a motion? Thank you. Councillor Palmer seconds. Is there any objection to the confirmation of the minutes? Madam Clerk, there is no objection shown, and I declare the motion carried. The next 4 items are our consent items, including item number 3, which Councillor Knoll declared a pecuniary interest on. Could I have a motion for all 4 of these consent items? Councillor Grant, thank you. And Councillor Adams, thank you for seconding. I will call item 3 separately. I'll call the Kerr Street budget separately from the package. And that way, everyone's eligible to vote the first time around. So I'm looking for any objection to all the items in 1 through 4, except for the Kerr Street Village BIA budget. Madam Clerk, there are no objections, and I declare those matters carried. I will now ask for a vote on the Kerr Street BIA budget, and Councillor Knoll will not participate. Are there any objections to that vote? Councillor Chisholm, would you like to be recognized?
Yes, Your Worship. I'd like to speak to item 3.
Please do.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm going through the 3 budgets with respect to the BIAs, and I just need clarification maybe from staff with respect to the tax levy on the downtown BIAs. It would seem that the 2 BIAs in Bronte and downtown Lakeshore, it's exactly the same from 2019 to 2020. However, the Kerr Street is reduced its tax levy substantially with the idea of giving us a rebate to assessment to the business, which I think is a very prudent move. I'm just wondering why the other BIAs haven't considered this.
I think they did consider it. I'm a member of the downtown BIA. I can tell you they did. And in the end, they decided not to do it because their merchants wanted to, the feedback from their members was that they wanted a really big Christmas at the end of the construction, which is now slated to finish except for cleanup in October. And I believe, Councillor O'Meara, that you're a member of the Bronte BIA board. Perhaps you'd like to speak to your board's decision.
Certainly, we had the same discussions as Mayor Burton of the town. We were actually tracking to have a 1.7% rate of inflation increase and do some incredible events, and we decided to scale back to no increase at all. So, and put a lot of the planning on the side burners. So that was a similar thing. When we come out of this pandemic, the restaurants, the shops, the businesses are going to need a lot of support, and we thought it fitting to get ready and be prepared for that so we can help support them as best as possible as well.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Chisholm, thank you for your questions. Do you have follow-up?
Yes, Your Worship. Just so it's for clarification, we're different positions with respect to the budgets. I would assume, and just for clarification, the Kerr Street BIA is moving forward with a reduce on the assessment, but the other BIAs are not doing it this time. Is that correct?
That's right. Each of our BIAs is very proud of being able to be distinctive and to shape their activities to the needs of their members. As I understood it, the Kerr Street BIA had consulted carefully with their members on the matter. And
just to add to that, my thanks and their due diligence with the board of the Kerr Street BIA. They've have talked to their businesses, and this is what they've indicated. So my thanks to the board and to Doug for making this possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chisholm. All right, I'm going to call the vote on this item. Is there any objection to this item? Madam Clerk, I see no objection to this item, and Councillor Knoll has not participated in this vote because of his declaration. And I declare the measure adopted. Thank you very much, everybody. We now move to our first discussion item, and that is the Oakville Enterprises Annual General Meeting and financial update. We have a report from the Acting Commissioner of Corporate Services, and Rob Lister, the CEO of Oakville Enterprises, is attending electronically with a presentation. I look forward to our first wrestling with the technology of this type of addition to our meeting. Madam Clerk, who's up? Well, here we go. I'm seeing something. All right, we're sharing the presentation. Now we just need, presumably, either the commissioner or Mr. Lister.
Am I able to be heard? Rob
Yes.
Lister here.
Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Lister. Thank you. The floor is yours, and your presentation is in front of us on our screens.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor Burton and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to present today at our annual general meeting. On the video call with me today are Board Chair David Brennan and Chief Financial Officer Karen Marner. Next slide, please. Our first part of business is the proposed slate of the Board of Directors. Then we'll move into summarizing key 2019 highlights. I'll provide an update on Oakville Hydro's liability, financial update on 2019, and conclude with a status update on how we're managing our businesses through the pandemic. Next slide, please. These individuals on the screen are the proposed slate of Board of Directors for Oakville Enterprises Corporation and Oakville Hydro. A recommendation has been submitted to Council for approval of the Oakville Enterprises directors. The directors are watching today's meeting by video. The proposed directors are Jane Allen, Heather Angel, David Brennan, Mayor Rob Burton, Siobhan Byron, Lucy Casasilla, Patrick Crowley, Ray Green, Sarah Lance, Helen Palmer, David Pasica, Mike Russell, and Cheryl Watson. We also provided a recommendation to Council for the appointment of KPMG LLP Chartered Accountants as auditors for the corporation for 2020. Next slide, please. Thank you. 2019 highlights. Oakville Enterprises and Oakville Hydro had another strong year in 2019. Highlights include our safety program, Staying Alive, contributed to both Oakville Hydro and GTEL, reaching 1.5 million hours worked without a lost time in 2019. Both companies were recognized by the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association. Throughout 2019, OEC was recognized with over 8 industry awards. Some of the more notable awards were Mary Caputi's Outstanding Employee Award from the Ontario Energy Association and the Harris Conference Award for Outstanding Customer Service at Oakville Hydro. OEC and its group of companies continue to grow. We now have 13 branded companies with over 1,400 employees across Ontario and Alberta, providing a broad portfolio of energy and infrastructure services. Our electricity distribution service to the town of Oakville also continues to grow as we provide safe and reliable electricity to over 74,000 businesses, families, and individuals. We're proud members of the Oakville community. Last year, we were pleased to be able to provide more than $12.9 million in payments to the shareholder, the town of Oakville. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we have 13 businesses operating throughout Ontario and now Alberta. We have 19 office locations. This slide illustrates the logos of our companies, many of which you see on our vehicles as our employees travel the roads. Next slide, please. OEC's services. Our organization has continued to strengthen its business presence for providing valuable services to energy and infrastructure customers. We're building a great company that is being recognized by major customers. In 2019, we added gas meter reading across Ontario on behalf of other utilities, as well as setting the stage for entering Alberta locating market, which we started providing the service in April 2020. Next slide, please. Reliability for Oakville's electricity system. Driving for a consistent supply of power to our businesses, families, and individuals that Oakville Hydro serves is a metric we watch closely every day and they go to work for the goal of improving our efficiencies of handling storms and other unplanned outages. In 2019, Oakville Hydro performed better than the industry averages in the 2 key categories, that being the average number of power interruptions and the duration of interruptions. Power interruptions for Oakville customers averaged less than 1 outage in the year as compared to the industry average of 1.4 times a year. And the duration of power outages for Oakville customers lasted on average 35 minutes per year, compared to the industry average of 67 minutes per year. This was also an improvement from 2019, which saw 1.5 interruptions for a duration of 45 minutes. We had a good year for distribution system reliability, helped with only moderate wind and winter storms. Next slide, please. Advancing innovation. Innovation continues to be a primary focus. We're future-proofing our business in order to be agile in response to changing customer needs, while looking for methods to harness innovation, improving productivity and efficiency, and providing enhanced services for our customers. Developing our competitive advantage relates to staying on top of active disruption, new service offerings that are industry game changers, and implementing change improvements that make us more competitive in our space. Accelerating innovation culture is critical, even now virtually, through industry engagement, participation, and leadership in associations. Next slide, please. I will now pass the video screen over to Karen Marner, Chief Financial Officer, to speak to our 2019 financial results. Can we activate Karen?
Thank you, Rob. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great. Good afternoon, Mayor Burton and councillors. OEC has delivered consistent returns through a portfolio of energy and infrastructure businesses.
We're having audio problems
with 6.1 million dollar dividend. What's that?
Karen, we lost most of your first sentence.
Okay, is it better without the video?
Well, it's good right now, so whatever you're doing,
so
doing
I won't put the video on.
All right.
So we have had a consistent track record of delivering dividends with $6.1 million dividend declared to the town in 2019. OEC and its group of companies had a total comprehensive income of $9.4 million in 2019, and as Rob indicated earlier, provided total payments to the town of $12.9 million. Total assets have grown to $440.6 million, with total liabilities and shareholder equity at $288.5 million and $141.3 million respectively. With that, I will turn the presentation back to Rob Lister.
Thank you.
There we go. Just waiting for an unmute. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Next slide, please. Pandemic response update. In early March, I created a pandemic task force to help manage our businesses through these uncharted times. The pandemic has caused our businesses to alter processes, operations, change how we work, and how we manage customers. Our employees have done a lot of good work in this area. All employees, whether in the field or working from home, are practicing pandemic safety measures to ensure their safety and the safety of the public. Almost all our work and services have been deemed essential under the government's directives. Our office employees from all our locations continue to work from their homes with daily engagement from their supervisors. Oakville Hydro customers can continue to be kept up to date through our website, My Oakville Hydro portal, and social media platforms. Oakville Hydro is providing ongoing outreach to customers over the phone, email, and letters. Indications are that most commercial customers are continuing operations with some alterations to shifts, staffing, and work from home considerations. Fortunately, we've had minimal power outages. Assessing the pandemic, its changing circumstances, and the government announcements are ongoing activities. We will move forward cautiously along a time frame that best suits our circumstances based on safe work practices and guidance from the health authorities. I'm implementing the steps to ensure that our businesses remain strong and viable and our employees remain healthy. Next slide, please. Energy usage changes. Since the onset of the pandemic, energy consumption in Oakville has decreased by about 7% compared to the same period in 2019. And electricity peak demand has also reduced by 7%. A number of our peer LDCs are experiencing reductions in the order of 10 to 12%, and the IESO, the Provincial Electricity System Operator, reports the province is down about 14%. Next slide, please. Provincial government pandemic assistance. To aid families during the pandemic, the Government of Ontario has set emergency time of use prices at 10.1 cents per kilowatt hour around the clock until May 31st. This is the off-peak price from the 3-tier time of use rate structure. We haven't heard yet whether there'll be an extension of this rate or whether they will return to the previously set rates. The provincial government is also aiding customers by extending the winter moratorium on disconnections until the end of July. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for providing us the opportunity to share our 2019 highlights.
Thank you very much, President Lister. Members of council, are there questions for Mr. Lister? Thank you. Councillor Hazlett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. And it looks like you brought forward a great panel of directors. Could you just clarify for us how you go about selecting the board of directors and what that sort of process is, just for the public's edification?
Can I be heard? It's Dave Brennan.
Yes.
Yes, David, you can be heard.
So do you want me to speak to that, Rob?
Sure.
So this is an ongoing process that we basically have, to give you a feeling, we have, as you see, 13 directors, and we have a range of tenure going from the mayor and Ray Green, who've been on for 13 years, down to we've got three new board members coming on this year. And so we continue to have new board members come on as others retire off or move off. And when someone leaves the board, we take a look at our skills matrix that we've set up. So all members of the board bring in a different skills matrix, be it in the areas of electricity distribution, entrepreneurial experience, executive management, commercial board experience, regulatory affairs, human resources, finance, many different categories. So, and we make sure we have expertise in all of these critical areas, which is represented by the current 13 members. And as an example, Cliff Inskip was on the board for about 6 years, and he was one of our finance experts, and he just stepped down off the board, and we've replaced him with Patrick Crowley, who was the CFO at Omers for 10 years, and was head of strategy for the last 2 years when he was there. So we continue to monitor the experience needed and then appoint members based on what's required to help manage and grow the regulated and unregulated businesses. Does that give you a picture?
That is a great explanation. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you. I wonder if I could have a mover and seconder for the recommendations in the agenda. Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Elgar, thank you. Hands down. Any objection to the recommendation? Madam Clerk, there are none. I declare the measure carried. Council, before we go on, I want to thank Oakville Enterprises for another outstanding year. And I also want to congratulate all of you at Oakville Enterprises for the way you've stood up to the challenges of the pandemic. And as we know, the province is gradually loosening, and we're gradually gaining a sense of hope that we're passing through this to a better point than we've been through. We now need to turn our attention
Thank you very much.
to the 2020 tax levy bylaw and the report from the Finance Department. We have Danielle Tumman available if you have questions. If you haven't questions, I'll look for a mover and seconder. Councillor Knoll. I'll take that as a motion then. Councillor Sanju, I'll take that as a second. Any objection to the report? Madam Clerk, there are none. I declare the measure adopted. The next thing before us is the notice of intention to designate Garlock Gardens Cultural Heritage Landscape. Susan Shepard, our heritage planner, is available if you have questions. And in the alternative, I'll look for a mover and seconder. Councillor Duddick moves. Councillor Haslett-Thiel seconds. Is there any objection or question? Madam Clerk, I see no question or objection, and the designation notice is issued or will issue. The next item, Council, is item number 8, the Council and Committee Meetings Update. And this is the matter I referred to at the start of the meeting. And what this does is it amends our bylaw that we call our procedure bylaw to allow members of the public to participate electronically in open meetings of council during emergencies and also makes other housekeeping amendments. And the motion is to pass this. And connected with this, we also, in this motion, are calling a regular meeting of Planning and Development Council for June 16th at 6:30 p.m. and a meeting of the Budget Committee meeting for its inaugural meeting for June 16th at 2 p.m. I'll remind council members that that meeting is usually extremely short. All it usually does is choose a new chair. Is there questions about this Councillor O'Meara? Is that a motion or a question?
Question, Your Worship, and then I'll be happy to give you a motion.
Well, thank you.
My question is with regards to, as we move forward, will this also provide councillors the opportunity to join in virtually if there's an ongoing issue or if something has come up for whatever reason, if and when we get back to normal to meeting in person, or will that have to be a separate bylaw, or how would that work?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but I believe councillors have, by our previous amendment, already been authorized to participate virtually. No? No? The clerk says I'm wrong.
No, sorry.
It's a big man who admits when he's wrong.
I'm sorry. Through you, Mayor Burton, we do not have a provision in our procedure bylaw to participate electronically except through an emergency measure. We chose not to, the last amendment, we didn't include that because there are provisions in the Municipal Act under normal circumstances when you're participating electronically, you are not counted towards quorum, and you may not participate in an in-camera session. So it has some disadvantages.
Right. I understood the councillor to be asking, during the emergency, would councillors be able to participate virtually in these committees and these interactions? Councillor O'Meara, one way or the other, I hope your question's answered.
Well, it was actually moving forward, and if this one provided for, what they're speaking about federally is the hybrid model where some people can be in, and we've had a couple of maternity leaves, for example, and if going forward we have other councils who maybe would like to participate but cannot make it in for whatever reason. So this bylaw right now is not talking about councils, it's just talking about delegates. Then that's what I was just looking for clarification on.
That's right. This only deals with the present. This is only operative during an emergency declared by the appropriate authorities. The question you raise is one that we can certainly turn ourselves to over the next few months as we, speaking for myself and not knowing what the rest of you think, these electronic meetings have proven, I think, to be quite good, and we might want to consider innovation that up to now we haven't been willing to consider around electronic meetings. I'll take your...
That's great, Your Worship, but I'm happy to move the item.
Thank you. And Councillor Hazat-Thiel, are you seconding?
No, I'm looking to ask a question.
Well, you have the floor. Please,
Okay.
can I just get a seconder to get that out of the way, because I don't want to forget later. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lischina, thank you. All right, Councillor Hazat-Thiel, you have the floor.
Okay, on page 3 of the report, or page 19 of our addendums, the phrase is used, electronic participation must be clear and uninterrupted and allow for two-way communication. Should the electronic participation result in any unreasonable delay or interference with the council meeting, the connection will be discontinued. My question is, so then what? I'm a delegate. I might have gotten a bad connection. It might have been the town that had some electronic glitch. It doesn't close the loop for the delegate who really wanted to tell us something. I'm wondering if there's a possibility to amend that, to answer that, what would be the next step?
Well, I'm going to turn to the clerk, but as I recall, there's another clause that talks about rescheduling the meeting. So, Madam Clerk, do you want to add to that?
In our procedures, we've also asked that any delegates also provide their comments in written format prior to the meeting, if at all possible. But if they are coming in on the fly by telephone and they get disconnected in some way, I guess, as the mayor mentioned, there is an opportunity for council to defer making a decision on the matter if they feel that they haven't got full a disclosure from any interested party.
So thank you for clarifying that. So would we add in the statement, the matter may be deferred, or move to the end of the meeting until the connection can be reestablished?
Councillor, just give me a second while I check the resolution. I think that's in there. Oh, wait, I don't have that piece. You have to look
In the bylaw.
in the bylaw.
It's not in the bylaw,
Can I?
other than like the bylaw that's going forward today.
Yeah.
There is a notation at the bottom of page 19 that mentions that we would have additional public input if there's any doubt that all public comments were heard. Does that not apply?
Thank you, Councillor Grant. So does everyone have that? Councillor Grant?
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. So does that cover it? Otherwise, what I would propose is that we adopt this and amend it later, if necessary.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I think it's, I think everybody would probably agree. You know, a delegate goes, electronic delegations are already challenging enough, and so I just want us to be sensitive to, there is a rule that allows them in some way to make sure they have been heard. So I'm happy to support it if we can revisit that wording, if others feel that it needs to be revisited.
I think the report covers that, really.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Councillor Grant. That's very helpful. If there are any other questions, I'm not seeing any, so I'll ask if there's any objection to the measure. Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the measure is adopted. We now have the item number 9, the COVID-19 CAO update. We have a verbal update from our acting CAO, Jane Closey. And CAO, you have the floor and a presentation.
I use this keyboard? Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. The purpose today was for me to give you an update on where we are on the pandemic We are just finishing 10 weeks. It's amazing that the 2.5 months have gone as fast, really, as they have. March 17th, if you recall, the province declared the emergency, and that is extended until June 2nd. We'll see if it's extended past that. They've been extending it on a periodic basis. And then, of course, the town had its state of emergency on March the 24th. So just to get a picture of what's going around the world in Canada and here in Halton and Oakville, you can see the numbers that are there. Halton and Oakville have actually done a fabulous job in terms of flattening the curve. We did set out to accomplish not putting pressure on our hospital systems during this, and we certainly have succeeded at that. The Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital is in good condition in order to be able to withstand this pandemic. And so kudos to them in terms of their planning and to the community itself for all the efforts they've taken in distance separating and staying home. So the province began the implementation of their stage 1, or their phased approach to recovery. It has 3 stages within it. Sorry, I've missed my notes here. There are 3 stages to the recovery program. They are watching the numbers as they proceed to see how the numbers on the pandemic are proceeding before they move into other stages. Physical distancing, hand washing, wearing masks or face coverings are all still priority messages. The number of people gathering together of 5 has not changed. So those messages, while you don't see them frequently in the provincial announcements that are there, are still basic to how we need to go forward. The next slide I had actually sent this out earlier, and I've added the last week on. It gives you an indication of what has been the trend of the pandemic over since the beginning of March into this the last week. The blue line is the 5-day rolling average, so you get an idea of how it's increased to quite a great extent at the end of April. It started to drop. The province announced at the end of April their recovery program. We continued to drop down. In the last little while, we've now started to roll up again, but the last week you can see a bit of a dip, so perhaps we're on the mend. But there are numbers that the province is watching on a regular basis to make sure that we can continue on with the recovery phases that they've set out. So here is their recovery stages. As I said, they're stage 1, 2, and 3 that they've set out. In terms of stage 1, we saw that roll out last week with the retail stores opening up, full construction returning, as well as many of the town facilities coming back on stream. They haven't changed the gathering groups. They're still the small 5, as I had said before, so we haven't seen that number change at all. The time frame for stage 2 to roll out is all dependent on the numbers, as I had said before. So we'll see how the numbers go in the next while. They're monitoring on a 1 to 2 week basis. So we don't expect to see anything this week, but we could certainly for next week or at the end of this week. Along with each one of these phases, they've issued guidances to the businesses that are opening to make sure that they follow all the public health information. So they have now 90 guidelines that specify requirements for employees as well as employers in a variety of different businesses. Many of those actually apply to the town itself. And the Premier certainly did emphasize when he announced the openings last week that a priority is to maintain the safety measures that they have, also within their guidelines, but however the businesses can implement it, and the businesses would open only when they could ensure they could maintain those safety measures. So the town actually had started its recovery program quite some time ago. The mayor had established the economic task force, also the community development task force, which looked at rolling out the digital applications that we now have. So that committee has pretty well sunsetted itself. And we also started the recovery committee. We had its first meeting on May the 12th. The recovery committee is a a specific committee that's outlined in the town's emergency management plan. Its composition, its mandate, its roles and responsibilities are all set out within that plan. And so the first meeting was held on May the 12th, as I had said. And at that meeting, we adopted a strategy and a framework that's really outlined in the report that you have from the mayor's office, which is item number 12 on your agenda. So there are 4 principles that plan follows. And these are the key elements that we look at as we bring back services. So one is safety, and I would think, as the mayor has emphasized many times, safety is the top priority in bringing back any service. But the other elements that we need to consider is the speed or the quickness that we can bring it back that meets a lot of the community expectations as they go forward, as they themselves have see using those facilities again. The benefit that the service provides, so will it provide for an economic recovery? As you had requested, we had put in the digital applications for planning and development applications, because that was certainly an economic recovery, and that was something we could get off the ground fairly quickly and up and running, and that drives the economy. So that was an important aspect to begin those ones first. But also to consider, does that service that's coming in, does it benefit a wide range of people? So perhaps we should spend a little bit more energy on some services that provide a wider range of services and get those up and running, and then turn our attention to some of the others, all dependent on where the province is going. And the last is, there really is an opportunity as we bring back services to consider what financial benefits or efficiencies we can put in place in terms of the services. Again, I'll refer to the planning and development online service. That is certainly a betterment of that service to get it up and running on an online format. There are lots of other efficiencies that we could look at as we bring programs back. So these 4 principles form the basis in which we're looking at the return to service to guide us along the way. I do need to say, though, that the betterment component is one that we need to look at and consider, but it also needs to be balanced against the speed and the benefit as well, certainly not against the safety. Safety is always the priority. But what we are doing is identifying what are some of those efficiencies or financial benefits with a service as we're going through these detailed reviews that maybe we come back later and look at in a more longer-term framework so that we have the time to be able to implement those improvements. We have the service reviews that we've undertaken to date are quite extensive in terms of their review and the staff that are involved. It is a corporate decision in order to bring those services back. So there are a number of people that are involved in bringing information to those reviews. So we have looked at quickening the process on doing them and in phasing them into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. The Tier 1, as you can appreciate, the opening of benches, the tennis courts, the pickleball courts are fairly straightforward, so we could move on them very quickly in opening them up. Small number of participants in those reviews, and we could get them up and running quickly. The phase 2 are a little bit more complex. The boat launch was an example of that, where they have required online booking for launching boats. And so those types of systems we had to get into place before we could actually bring those services up. But it is fairly straightforward with a little bit more energy, a little bit more attention to detail than the phase 1s. The phase 3s are those types of services that are quite extensive in terms of understanding what are the considerations we need to put in place for the safety of the users. I'm sure you can appreciate indoor facilities is a good example of that. How do we ensure, particularly when there are team sports, how do we ensure that we maintain all the safety within those areas? So that is will take an extensive review in terms of opening up those facilities. One piece that I think we found when the province had opened up the first stage of facilities was that the provincial order, the announcement is heard, then the provincial order comes out. Quite often we need to wait until that provincial order actually comes out, which could be a day or 2 days or 3 days later. And the detail that's in that order actually specifies what we can and cannot do. And it quite often has a lot more detail than what was in the announcement itself. So whereas you may see an announcement come out for a facility to be open, and many people expect it to be open right away, understandably, but we do wait for those orders to come out and undertake that review so that we can open it as quickly as possible after that. So that is what the recovery framework and strategy sets out. And again, it's in the mayor's report that's item 12 on your agenda. And that's what we've been following as we begin to open up facilities. So what's happened so far? We've actually opened up a fair amount of facilities. You know that the launch of the digital applications, that one I've mentioned before, and we've had quite a bit of success with that. There was a lot of questions about whether or not we had cleared the backlog while we were not taking in applications. We've actually been quite successful with that. For example, in building, we've cleared off 95% of the applications that were submitted in 2019, and about half the number of applications that were submitted in 2020. We had quite a high increase on applications the first quarter of 2020, given the increase in the DCs that happened on April the 1st, but about 50% of those, over 50% of those were cleared off. Excuse me. We also introduced the inspections protocol, so now occupied homes can be inspected as we move forward with those building permits. We have, of course, you have a virtual council meeting today, which allows people to delegate to those meetings. We were very successful with the Heritage Oakville Committee meeting a week or two ago, and that allowed for, I think there was about 7 delegates who came into that, and we are prepared now for the Planning and Development Committee meeting, which you have approved in June. The staff that's been redeployed to the Parks Ambassador and Beautification have actually been a huge benefit to the town. One of informing and educating people within our parks. They're the eyes out there of what's happening so that we can respond the best way we can, particularly the Parks Ambassadors. The beautification program is up and well running now. Last week, they spent the week preparing most of the beds around town. Of course, it was a little too cold in the evening for planting. So we will see those planting beds starting, or the planting starting this week, with the planters actually arriving in the 3 downtown, or the 3 BIAs throughout town probably next week. So the beautification has been quite well undertaken as well. We are launching some appointments at town, so you see marriage licenses there. So today at 10 o'clock, we had our very first appointment for the marriage license, and I think that went quite well. And we're getting many more bookings as we go along. So it has been quite a popular service we've brought in. The community cleanup support program, you had asked actually at the last council meeting about the opportunities to have some better litter pickup within the town. Earth Day, of course, was missed this year, so this is an opportunity for us to get it back in place with the much support of the community. So there's a few more. Last week, you saw the opening of a lot of parks facilities. So the list here really represents most of the outdoor park facilities, with the exclusion of anything that is really a team sport. So for example, we don't have the permitted sports fields yet because that is a team sport, but people can enjoy the waterfront. The boat launching will be starting shortly at the Brawny Park, and you can launch your own boat there as well. You can see the list there. It's quite extensive in terms of what is open for all of us to go out and enjoy the outdoors. I wanted to give you a brief update on staff. 10 weeks into the pandemic, our services changed virtually overnight. Everything was changed around. So your frontline staff, your fire, your transit, your parks, your roads, have really continued to deliver the regular services, or most of those regular services. They do have some resources that were redeployed in other places. And of course, we didn't bring in the students and the seasonal and the casual assistants to help the roads and parks do their regular business. but they are functioning quite well, and we've got fairly regular maintenance programs up and running. The transit is, of course, at the Sunday service, as you know. And we have put in place several enhanced protocols in place for all of those services. Your critical staff, those are the staff that we identified early as being performing critical functions, are functioning very well at home. The remote to home, or the working remotely, has actually been quite successful, and it is a program we need to look at as we move forward in terms of how we would want to keep that in place over the longer term. And I've already spoken, I think, to the Parks Ambassadors and the beautification, which went very, very well with extensive redeployments into those two areas. There have been, we've been very lucky as a staff group in terms of being impacted by the virus itself. We've had 3 staff members that have tested positive, and we have, I think, 3 that are awaiting tests now. But that is quite a low impact in terms of our workforce, which we're very, very happy about. So in terms of the response to COVID at the community-wide level, during the shutdown phase, certainly Oakville was very, very responsive to staying at home, stopping the spread, and we did have a very favorable impact on flattening the curve. The response out to the frontline workers has been great. The programs that have been put in place for the seniors, not only by the town, but by many groups throughout the community, has been very helpful in terms of dealing with the isolation that the community has experienced. I think we have gotten, I know we have gotten several emails about the Message in a Bottle program that was set up, and that's been very well received by a lot of the seniors within our community. The public have seen, and you see it out there on an ongoing basis, have been practicing social distancing, the hand washing and all those things to prevent the spread, and certainly that has paid off for us. And so I wanted to conclude with what's upcoming. So what are we doing in terms of bringing back other services? There has been a few more services that the province has noted that they can open up, and there are some services that we can think about opening up too as we go forward that are not necessarily limited by the province. So the library is working on curbside pickup and return of materials, so you should see that. I believe it's around the early part of June that we should see that rolling out. We are looking at opening up our service Oakville counter, certainly with the planning and building, people coming in to drop off drawings, now opening up the marriage license. There is an opportunity by appointment only to better accept people into town hall for those appointments at the service Oakville counter. We are exploring committee of adjustment now that we have the virtual meetings, we think, up and running fairly well. There is an opportunity to begin the committee of adjustment meetings. Liquor licenses is something also that we're exploring. You had mentioned earlier about the emergency, the ability to hold virtual meetings under the existing legislation. It, as the clerk had said, is only specific to an emergency, but there are many changes in legislation we may want to look at that would require someone to come in person to the town hall. So we are keeping track of those so that in the next short while we can come back with some suggestions to you to request the province to change legislation so it gives us the better ability to be able to operate in these circumstances. So the longer term pieces that we're looking at, of course, with the warm weather, now all of a sudden started, splash pads, playgrounds, summer camps are all going to be things that people will want to look at exploring. We do need guidance from the province on those, particularly the summer camps. We will need guidance from them in order to open those. But we've started our reviews early so we can understand what is the impact on our services so that as soon as those guidelines are out, we're then ready to begin. We have not, at this point in time, canceled the programs for the summer. We will be doing that, but until we can bring out the new programs with the guidelines clearly understood, we'll bring those new programs out and cancel the old ones. Of course, a refund will be there, similar to the earlier programs for the existing summer camps we have. So that concludes my presentation. We're doing very well in flattening the curve. And I would suggest you may want to hear Nancy Sully's, the treasurer's presentation, and perhaps address questions with the two of us combined. I leave that up to you.
Well, Councillor Giddings has raised his hand, and I'll turn to him to see if he wants to ask now or wait after Nancy. Oh, I've got a lineup. So Councillor Giddings, you have the floor. Or let me ask you, Council, do you want to wait for after Nancy, or do you want to do them in steps? Steps.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the
steps.
question. This is specifically for acting CEO Closey, so I don't, at this point, don't have any questions for Nancy.
All right, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jane. I was curious in terms of, you talked about the backlogs in building and development and engineering being cleared up. You mentioned that 90% of the 2019 applications have been cleared up. Would those applications have been more complex developmental applications?
They could have been applications that came in later in the year. They would have been applications that not necessarily, I would say to you. They are applications that we just had that we were processing through. And we were able to get to them in the amount of detail, get in touch with the applicants to get the resubmissions in from them and focus on those resubmissions rather than dealing with the new applications at the same time, which is the normal practice, without having new applications coming in while we were trying to develop the online system. It gave us a chance to really focus on the applications that we had, review the resubmissions, and issue the permits. And it was about a 95% clearance of all those 2019 applications.
All right, good stuff. Are more coming in than we're getting out the door? Or just curious in terms of the flow. Are we almost caught up with 2020? Are we staying ahead of whatever's coming in electronically?
So 2020, the ones that came in the first quarter, we were about 60% of them that were cleared off that had come in. We have a number of applications, and I don't for you have an actual number. I will get you some numbers on the ones that have come in and how we have been able to process those through. But it has been quite active in all the planning and development departments in terms of the number of applications that have come in since then. And we're continuing to process them. I just don't have a number for you today.
Well, thank you for that. And after last week's virtual Heritage Advisory Committee meeting, that generated a few that the residents were very much after. In terms of the ambassadors, with the weather on the weekend, as they were out patrolling the lakeside parks or the more popular parks in other parts of Oakville, was there any need to call in bylaw enforcement or HRPS or the Oakville Milton Humane Society for assistance or for help?
No, we didn't need to do that. I would flag the two areas that were a bit of a concern for us was Lions Valley Park. Lions Valley Park is closed at this point in time. It's not closed as a result of the pandemic. It's closed because the trails in that park are unsafe. And so we need to get in there and clean up those trails so that it's safe for people to go there. But it is a popular location, and we had many people going into that park that we shouldn't have had. So we did have some reports on that and we're able to get out to it, but it is something we're going to have to communicate a little bit more effectively. The second area is the waterfront, of course. We've opened up the parking lots down there, and it is an area we usually have more of a presence of bylaw officers in that area along the waterfront because of its popularity, especially during this weekend when the weather was so wonderful. So yes, those are the two things we're doing, but I wouldn't say we didn't have a Trinity Bellwoods, if I can be a little bit frank.
All right, thank you for that.
All right, the next is that I see is Councillor Duddick. 'Cause- 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 '
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Acting CEO Closey. I sent you an email the other day, and I'm just raising it for the benefit of others that are attending the virtual meeting now, where a local resident wanted to inquire about purchasing a pool and was advised by a local distributor that it takes about 2 months to get a permit through the town of Oakville. And so maybe once you've had an opportunity to look into that and comment back, you could share it with everyone, just in the event others are having it raised as well.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanju.
Mayor Burton. Just a quick question, CEO Closey. You're talking about the reopening of summer camps and the timelines. Do we have any type of an indication of what we can go back to residents with right now? I know we get a lot of young families in our areas and parents asking whether they're going to be refunded the money that they put into the summer camps, whether they're going to have to make alternate arrangements for summer camps. Is there any kind of clarity we can provide to parents right now?
Mayor Burton, through you, Mayor Burton, we really need to see the guidelines from the province before we can determine what types of programs that we can offer. So that is an absolute must for us to get in there to understand that component of it. We will, I could say, not be proceeding with exactly the same programs we had before because they just don't respect the safety requirements. So we will be moving to cancel those programs. But as I said, we were hoping to get out with a similar message at the same time with a cancellation, and then this is the alternative package so people know what they can do with their children over the summer. I know it's an important part for parents in terms of having their children in summer camps, but we still need to get the guidelines in from the province in order to be able to finalize those programs.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Closey. I think the guidance that we have for our parents right now is hurry up and wait, unfortunately.
Yes.
Great, thank you so much.
The next I have is Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just had a quick question, follow-up question on patrolling the parks. Are our bylaw officers regularly patrolling the parks, or are they only called by our park ambassadors if there's an issue?
No, the bylaw enforcement officers are regularly patrolling the parks as well. We have put a priority behind enforcing the requirements related to the emergency. So certainly patrolling parks are part of that. We are still reacting to inquiries that we get in. So if we're called out to some emergency on some other bylaw infraction, we are still doing those. But the focus is definitely on enforcing the emergency measures that we've put in place.
Okay. And sorry, on one of the slides, there was under reopening, it was public bathrooms. I'm assuming that means for the parks. Would that go, is that on the horizon of being opened, or are we still waiting for guidance on the province on that as well?
So we understand that we are able to open them. The concern and question by us is whether or not we can open them safely. As I'm sure you can appreciate, the touch surfaces in a washroom are much difficult, or much more difficult to keep clean. In part, some of the guidance that we've heard from the province is that we need to look at cleaning them twice a day. So just the resourcing in order to be able to put that in place are things that we need to take into consideration before we can really open up those washrooms. It is something that we're looking at, but I don't have a time frame at this point in time.
Thank you.
The next I have Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Jane, for this. You had brought some information on the graph about the COVID cases. I've had sort of secondhand information on the provincial levels and what the GTA municipalities are doing. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about how we're doing outside of the major urban core? Because I think a lot of people have been upset and worried about the trend going up over the past 5 days, but I'm just not sure if that's what we're seeing in the municipalities outside of Toronto, or is that everywhere?
So the chart that I had as part of the presentation was definitely for Ontario as a whole. I'm following the numbers just as you have as they come out from the region, and they've been staying fairly steady. But I haven't looked beyond that. I know what we hear from Peel is their numbers are still increasing, but I have not done any work. Perhaps we can look at putting a chart together and sending it out to you, even at a regional basis, in terms of the change in cases or the number of cases on a graph over the last, perhaps in the beginning of March. So I can commit to sending that out from the information we get from the regions.
Thank you very much. I just have 2 more questions. Firstly, so now we're allowed to, people are allowed to use parks and picnic benches. What's our cleaning regiment on those in those areas?
So I would actually ask Colleen Bell to respond to that, particularly the picnic areas.
Thank you.
Generally speaking, we leave it to just general cleanup. We haven't done anything more intense than what we normally do because of the challenges we have with respect to resourcing. What we're hoping to do is to bring students back on sometime in June so that we can increase our resourcing levels.
Okay, so right now it's sort of fend for yourself if you want to go use a picnic bench. Is that sort of where we're at?
Well, we would certainly encourage people, if they were going to use a picnic bench, to put down some sort of covering if you were going to eat a meal or something like that, that you can easily wipe down.
Okay, thanks for that. And then my last question, Jane, just relates to bylaw enforcement. I'm sure many of my council colleagues were inundated with calls and emails on the weekend when the warm weather comes. And I know with our staffing limitations and our finances right now, but we're going to be kind of like, racquetballs getting bounced around here. Go here, go there, do this. What is the best way for us to tell residents if they really are adamant on notifying by law that there are people gathering? What's the easiest, most efficient, and quickest way for them to get a response if they want to file a complaint?
So there is a hotline number that they call through to. I don't have the hotline memorized.
That's the Halton Regional Police secondary line.
That is, and all complaints can go into that hotline. It's on our website, so anyone can phone into that line and report something.
Okay, and that is the line that's 24 hours a day they can call into that line?
Yes, they can.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm is next.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple of quick questions, and they might be more directed to Commissioner Bell with respect to the recreation programs. And the first question I've got, and it's starting to come to the surface, so no pun intended, about our swimming pools. As the heat comes, people need to get into the swimming pools, and it's always been a challenge with our pools to be available during hot periods. And look at today, of course, summer's just dropped in on us. So the pools are going to be a real issue coming up, and I think you're absolutely right with the directives were coming from the province. We're waiting for that. But on a couple of occasions, on communications I've seen, I'm a little worried about that some of the residents or people in our municipality or outside our municipality saying, well, they can go into the pools because there's chlorine in there and that'll kill the virus. I don't think so. Chlorine, in my world, chlorine is a claribacteria in pools, in the water, not in the air. So if we could find some information or communication to be sent out to clarify that misnomer with respect to the pools, kids can be in pools because of the chlorine, and that's going to be okay. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced on that. So I think we need that clarity. So can I have a comment or response from Commissioner Bell on that with regards to that concern?
So actually, I'm going to answer that one because I would first of all say we are not healthcare providers. in order to give you the expertise on that. So we would look to getting in touch with public health. We are, for everything that we're doing, following the guidance we get from the health professionals. I think that's the best thing for us to do at this point in time. All of our guidelines that we put in place are confirmed through the provincial or the Halton public health officials. And so the question about whether or not the pool water kills the virus or not is something we really should be asking the medical officer of health on. And so we'll commit to do that.
Thank you very much. That's what all I'm looking for is a clarification on that, on the scientific approach to that. And if we get into our communication, because we do have all our outdoor pools and so forth. My second question is with summer programs. And I know a couple of weeks ago, Burlington made the blanket statement they're canceling all their summer programs. Well, again, we're getting calls, is it happening in Oakville? And I'm saying, well, hold on here. I haven't heard any notification, but we're seriously looking at closing them, but also looking at alternatives. But the concern I have, we're looking at alternatives for programming. Again, it's because recreation in the summer programs are mass program, they're mass participation, so you're going to have an issue with distancing. But if there is the attempt to have programs, how are we going to get the staff trained appropriately and timely in order to deliver programs? So would those programs be delayed into, say, late July or 1st of August in order to make sure our staff are trained? Or are we looking at the staff we've had in previous years to come on that are previously trained, and we would not hire any new part-time seasonal people?
So through you, Mayor Burton, we are looking at the summer programs themselves to see what we can roll out. We first have to wait for the guidance that comes in from the province in terms of what exactly we need to do. Trying to get ahead of that and understand what kinds of programs, given our understanding of what other guidance documents have given us, just so that we understand the implications and what could happen. We're starting to look at the issue now and think of the types of programs that potentially we could look at incorporating. There's a great network among all the recreation providers throughout at least the GTA in terms of the types of programs that they could roll out. So those discussions are happening at the same time. In terms of one thing I would note, we are really taking the same approach that Burlington is. The difference is that Burlington announced the closure before they had the new program set up. So it appears if they had no programs. But in fact, they are also developing alternative programs, as are we. So I don't have an answer for you today. What are the staffing implications of it? That's exactly what the service reviews are going to be doing. This is one of those tier 3 because it does require bringing other staff back in, how many programs we have, how we can phase in programs, how we can distribute them geographically throughout the town so that we have a good exposure to them, are all the kinds of questions that we'd ask ourselves in a service review in order to bring back a summer camp program. So that review is going on right now. So today I don't have all of those answers for you.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. I have remaining questions from Councillor Knoll and Councillor Grant and Councillor Lischina. Councillor Knoll and Councillor Adams.
Can you unmute?
We need to.
I thought that was. I got it. Okay. I thought you guys did that. My number one question was going to be about summer camps. I just want to put an exclamation mark behind what Councillor Sandhu said on that. That's important to our constituents. You referenced liquor licenses, and beyond commenting, what role do we have in liquor licenses in the town of Oakville?
So I look to Vicky to answer this one in part, but I think it is the commenting role and getting those comments through to the liquor license board so that they, when they're in a position to actually approve them, they can proceed with them. I mean, this is key when you think of the patios and trying to get the patios up and running. As much as we can do in providing our comments so they're easy to flow through is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I realize that they're really important, particularly for our restaurateurs in town. I just wasn't aware that. I wanted to make sure that was the only role we had. I wasn't sure that was I wasn't sure there was another bottleneck beyond that. One one of the number one comments I'm getting from constituents right now are the number of fireworks being let off in town. A day does not go by that there's not another fireworks display being put on in an impromptu basis in a park by enthusiasts. And I know we have strict bylaws regarding firework discharge, but is there anything being done to specifically monitor our parks and open spaces for people illegally discharging fireworks? Because we're going to be facing this between now and Canada Day, because this is the sales period when they're readily available.
Through you, Mayor Burton. We have done a lot of social media campaigns in order to get the message out that fireworks are not permitted in our parks. Someone could do that in their backyard, provided they maintain all those social distancing and the small gathering locations. But it's mostly the social media campaign that we've done. We certainly have bylaw enforcement officers. We actually have a lot more bylaw enforcement officers than we normally do, so our coverage is a little bit better. We do, though, have a number of new bylaws to implement at the same time. So I think it's the communication that is the most important to get out. And if anyone can call into the town line in terms of the fireworks, we can have the bylaw enforcement out there in order to investigate it.
So for constituents that may be watching or for us to communicate, is the best number to call while it's happening the 311 or the Service Oakville number or the enforcement number? The bylaw enforcement
Looking
number.
to Jim Barry to see what's the best number.
Yeah.
Service Oakville, yes. The Service Oakville number is the best number to call to.
So constituents can call 311 or 845-6601, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Next up is bikes. With the lack of summer camps or overnight summer camps and certainly what will become a reduced number of day camps in town, I think we're already seeing it, and it's going to become exponentially more, and that is children on bicycles in town. And I sent an email to you and to Ms. Stevens earlier about it, and I'm not raising it to complain about the email because I haven't given you a lot of time to respond, but since I've got you, I'm wondering if we're going to be doing anything specifically to draw attention to the fact that there are more kids on bikes, and particularly on the trails where they don't have stop signs, and some of the kids think they can just basically cross major arteries where the trails basically intersect.
So through you, Mayor Burton, I haven't had a chance actually to talk to Jill Stephen about that, but we should, this is a new problem as a result of COVID. You're quite right. Kids are out on their bicycles a lot more. They're home. They're not at school, particularly right now.
Right. Yeah.
So we do need to look, I think, at a safety program. So I'm at this point in time, I'm going to have to get back to you on, I'll get back to all of council actually in terms of what we can do to address the question of the kids' safety on the bicycles.
Great. Thank you for allowing me to put that front and center in front of everybody, because I think that's going to become a significant, it's already a significant issue. It's going to become more significant as boredom starts to set in over the course of the summer for our young friends. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grant?
And thank you for Councillor Knoll to bring up the fireworks. The thing that I've been noticing, because I live in a place where we have fireworks going off in all the parks I can see, which is behind a number of schools. When most of these fireworks happen after hours. So what is the number that these people can call to make sure that somebody's attending to these problems?
So I'm going to ask Jim Barry to come up and speak to the fireworks specifically. We have 24/7 bylaw enforcement now, so the timing is not really the issue. Jim?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As CAO Closey has noted, the timing is not the issue. We have enforcement 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the Service Oakville line, 845-6601, is also available throughout that time. There's an after-hours service provider for that. So we'd recommend that if a resident identifies that there's fireworks going off, to call that number, and staff will respond to the complaint.
Okay, I just mentioned because at the back of the French school at the end of Ridge Road, a night ago, there were fireworks going off, and I tried to call in, and I couldn't get an answer or anybody to do anything about it. Then I had people calling me, asking me what's going on. So I'm just concerned that we don't have the enforcement prepared for that.
Through Mr. Mayor, I would certainly, if there was a specific incident, I'd like to look into that. Especially at this time, we do have, as CAO Closey has noted, officers, our shifts are augmented until midnight. So there should be staff available to respond to that. With that said, there is also the concern, if they are responding to other calls, if the calls have backed up, there may be other calls for fireworks, for COVID, that could delay a response. So if there's a specific issue, I would like to look into that.
Okay. I've known you for years. I trust you. I believe what you're saying. Back then to talking about people crossing the 6-line, well, actually 6-line of the Crosstown Trail. There is a huge concern. I mean, Jeff and I have brought this up before because we were concerned about the fact that people are going to be on their bikes, and more cars are coming up and down 6-line because of the Trafalgar expansion. So we are now concerned about the fact that as people try and cross 6-line, they have to deal with more cars. And the people who are driving cars are concerned about the fact that they have to deal with people who are on cycles who are crossing that trail. So what can we do to deal with that?
I don't have an answer for you that today. I think that was part of the inquiry that Councillor Knoll had sent
Okay.
in. And we had actually an earlier inquiry from another resident as well on that. So I'll get back to you in the update that I send out, just in terms of what we're doing, particularly for those crossings, and what we can do in terms of this year.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I know that we can't open up all the pools, but looking at the predictions for the summer, it's going to get hotter. As we can't open up pools, what are we going to do for water parks, have splash parks open?
So
Can we, go ahead. Just go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor Burton. We are looking at splash pads right now to see what we can do in opening them up. We suspect they'll be easier to open than outdoor pools.
Right.
And so with the nice weather upon us this weekend, we are definitely looking at the splash pads to see what measures we need to have in place. We do need to consult with the health professionals as well to see what they would recommend. So that is ongoing work right now. And as soon as it can be opened up, we will get it opened up and we'll let you know right away.
Okay. Thank you. And certainly, I'm sorry for taking up all this time, but yeah, it's getting warm out there. And I just know that at least the splash pads might be a good place for people to get together, but we don't want to be like that Auburn Toronto over the weekend. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No need to apologize for representing your constituents. We have 3 more questioners on my list. Councillor Liz Chinna, Councillor Adams, and Councillor Haslett-Deal, and Councillor Elgar.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jane, again to you and your team for, and all the staff in the town for the job well done to date. Just a clarification on the first point. I realize Councillor Grant asked about the indoor-outdoor pools. Are we considering them as the same risk profile? The outdoor pools versus indoor?
No,
Okay.
Based on all the information we've understand from public health officials to date, indoor is a much different circumstance than outdoor.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
My second question is actually residents who had contacted me, and I believe I'd also sent an email to you as well, about other residents calling our 311 number and letting our staff or bylaw staff know that there's people coming into their homes or actually not into their homes, but into their backyards. So the issue is if you have a family who's potentially 5 people, and one of their teens brings in 2 or 3 or 4 of their friends, and the parents are well aware, they're outside, they're social distancing, doing all the right things, and they get a knock on the door of bylaw. So could you provide some clarification on that, please?
Yes, you had actually asked that question earlier. And it is, so the guidelines is that you need to have in any location, as I understand it, no more than 5 people if they're not in your same household. And of those 5, you need to stay 2 meters apart. So those are the requirements that are there. So it could be whether or not a gathering in your backyard as opposed to a gathering in your house. Those 2 different gatherings, are they the same gathering? We're asking legal if not. I do need to say the bylaws were drafted fairly, I don't want to say quickly because they still are solid bylaws, but there is a common sense approach to bylaws when you apply them. So if the gathering of 5 is distanced enough from the other gathering of 5, then I would think those are 2 separate gatherings, but we're confirming with legal now.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that because I know there's a number of parents, including my own son, who will go and meet with 2 of his friends outside. Parents are well aware that they're distancing and all of that. So this was just brought to my attention from other parents. So would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much. I had just a couple of questions for you. Some of them have already been covered. The fireworks are clearly an issue, I think, for a number of us. So I'd follow up with the other councillor members who raised that and support them and their concern on that. The issue about how we enforce the groups of 5 rule, I think, is becoming a bigger issue as people get messaging about we're reopening. And how do we manage that issue around telling people you should still be staying home as much as you can, you shouldn't be creating giant social groups, and yet we have this rule of 5. The last thing that I don't think has really been talked about is can you go through the tax levy bylaw with us on the waiving of the late payments, and how are we going to communicate, or when are we going to communicate that broadly to the public?
And through you, Mayor Burton, Nancy's presentation actually will cover that off.
Okay, then I'll happily wait for that. Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Further to some questions about who do you call, I'm wondering if there's a way on our weekends that when you call into Service Oakville, it can go directly to the after-hours service. Having had to hand out the number numerous times, one of the frustrations is they go through a long message, which has some good information, but really is they want to get to the dispatch that's going to here. We've got a fireworks problem. We have a property standards problem. It's a bit of a process to get there on the line. It's not 30 seconds, I can assure you. It's multiple minutes, it appears. If there's a way to change the system to it's after hours and it's going to go more direct, I know that's a technical request, but I think that the residents give up, and that's when they start to call all the councillors saying, can you do something about this? So I would just ask if that's a possibility to be planned for in the future.
So through you, Mayor Burton, whether or not that's the solution or not, I'm not sure, but we'll certainly look into how we can get the complaints quicker out to the bylaw officers so they can get busy on their work. So we'll look into that a little bit further, as I think Jim had indicated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar, thank you for your patience. It's your turn.
No worries. Mine, pretty well every question you think of has been asked. Just one regarding summer students. Students are getting worried. Will they have a job at all, Jane? And I heard you say earlier something about they're going to start bringing them back in June, sometime in June. Has anything been relayed to any of the students at this point at all as to whether they will or we might have a job at least? Because I think there's a lot of concern right now with the cost of education and whether they're going to be able to get at least a couple of months of money.
No, at this point in time, I don't believe anything has been relayed to the students. The plan that we had in place quite some time ago was that by the middle of June, on the assumption that facilities would be open at the beginning of July, we would begin to bring staff back, and that would include students and seasonal staff. And students might actually be a little bit later than that. So they haven't been communicated yet. If we are going to get up to the point where we're running fairly regular services, we're going to need those students back again. I think as we had said in the last meeting, between our casual, seasonal, part-time and student staff, they represent at least 50% of our workforce. So we need them back in order to be able to function, but their coming back has to be better timed with the return of those services. And so they'll be notified in enough time to be able to come in for those. And around the middle of June would be the timing that we're thinking of bringing them back, at least to some extent.
So that's good news for the students for sure. And I'm just thinking if we did bring them back, if we do, and that then after a few weeks, things peak again with the COVID and they have to be laid off, would they be able to pick up their $2,000 a month for 4 months?
I don't know.
From the federal government. I just thought, if something did happen, it might be really interesting to see how that would roll for them.
Yeah, I don't know if Julie is online, if she, Julie Clark, if she could answer the question in terms of if they come in and out of the program or not. But I did want to caution, I don't want to convey the opinion that or the information that they would all be coming back as the middle of June. We are going to have to look at each one of the services that they roll in, understand what are the needs of resourcing, and then be able to implement those resourcing as we go forward. So this will be a rolling reintroduction of students over the time period. But if Julie Clark is online.
I am. Can you hear me? Yes. My understanding is that yes, they would be eligible for CERB if we brought them back, and then in the event we had to lay them off again. I would just note, though, eligibility is always up to the federal government and their processes, but my understanding is yes.
I thank you for that. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, everybody. Councillor Knoll?
I unmuted myself this time. Great. Two things that came out of that great conversation and lots of information is one, and this may be a regional predominant issue, but it's certainly going to impact us here too. We talked about temperature. Today we have a heat advisory. Traditionally, all of our rec centers, our community centers, our libraries are cooling centers for people that don't have air conditioning and may be suffering from the heat. And as this continues, and I think the predictions are that we are looking at a very hot summer. Are we making any accommodations or giving this any thought as to how we might be able to get ahead of this? If we have our facilities closed?
Yes, we are. We are identifying what we would need in order to be able to open up those facilities as cooling centers. What do we need for the safety protocol? What kind of resourcing we need to do that? Do we need to do it in all the community centers, or could there be fewer locations? Not ideal for residents, but perhaps better able to manage from a town perspective. So we are doing that review at this time.
And does any of that rely on alterations to the provincial order? Because I know that our recreation centers, for example, libraries are closed. Are we able to open, say, Glen Abbey for the sake of being a cooling center if, in fact, the provincial order says you can't?
Yeah, good question, and we'll have to investigate that as we see how we can open up portions of those buildings.
Thank you, and not to beat a dead horse on this fireworks thing, but I wanted to just get some clarification from you. In your response to my question on fireworks, you did mention, as an aside, you said, of course, people can have them in their backyards. I would like to clarify, for the sake of the public and going forward, that they can only have them in their backyards. They can only be discharged in Oakville only during very specific times. So whether they're in backyards or in parks today, they're illegal, correct?
You know what? I would feel much more comfortable for the public to hear this from Jim Barry, who knows this bylaw much better than I. So, Jim?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor, you are correct. Today they would be illegal. It's the Victoria Day, holiday, Canada Day, and Labor Day. There are other exceptions, but in general, they're specifically laid out in the bylaw.
Those exceptions are based on permits, though, correct?
No, on specific days. Victoria Day, for instance, you are
No,
allowed.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah.
The holidays are excluded from the bylaw, but when you said other exceptions, so the only time other than Victoria Day, Canada Day, and Labor Day would be based on a permit, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you're correct, although there are other exceptions, again, for religious activities.
Okay, so if a constituent has a concern about fireworks, whether it's in a park or even in somebody's backyard disturbing them, they can still call for bylaw enforcement, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And again, we would, without going through the bylaw is fairly in-depth and does present, even in a backyard, several constraints for setting off fireworks. For instance, they can't go over another neighbor's property, they can't go over the road, certain age limits. So if there are questions, I would recommend that the resident contact the town through Service Oakville. An officer will go by, check it out, and just make sure.
Okay, and the last thing on this, and I promise never to talk about fireworks again, at least for another 24 hours, and that is I know we were communicating in social media about the rules around fireworks leading up to the Victoria Day holiday, and I'm assuming we will be again leading up to Canada Day. But can we also communicate what constituents or what our residents can do if they are disturbed? I mean, I know I will be communicating this. I'm sure many others will be doing this, but I think that it should be clear that, one, you shouldn't be doing it, and two, if you're disturbed by it, and some people are, I'm surprised to the degree they're disturbed, but they are really disturbed. But two, if you are disturbed by this, and if you are witness to a illegal display, call this number. Is that possible?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely. We'll make sure to include that in our social media posts.
That's great. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Longo, and then Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me?
You are being heard very well.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Jane, I want to thank the town staff and yourself and your leadership through this challenging time of COVID-19. So I just want to, do a shout out to the town staff. And just a quick question on, I know we're doing the reopening and we're following the provincial lead, but in the event there is a second wave, is there any contingency planning that you're doing just in the event that we have to start rolling this back because of either employees being sick and not having enough staff, or all of a sudden we're going to have to, potentially close again? Is that factored in any of the planning, or is it all just kind of a reopen and let's get going rather than kind of a cautionary tale of a second wave could be, who knows what that might bring?
Through you, Mayor Burton. No, actually, that is very much part of the service review. It's not only looking how we can roll it out, but because we're rolling one out at a time and we understand exactly the implications of that, you can also look at rolling it back at the same time. So that's built into the service reviews. On our understanding, as is yours, that we may very well have a second wave and we'll have to roll it back. So it is considered in terms of overall plans. And just further to say, I have to, in your comments about town staff, I have to say that town staff have done an absolutely amazing job in jockeying and innovating and doing all kinds of different things in order to get the services rolled out. So you as council have an amazing staff team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. Just on the fireworks, one more thing. When we do the communication, can we also include communication on safety measures to be taken in circumstances where fireworks are allowed? As I imagine, leading up to Canada Day, people will be purchasing fireworks and using them. So just so you could put out some safety tips for them.
Certainly we will. And I think actually we should probably put out some broader communication on fireworks, just so the questions in terms of what I can do and what I can't do are very clearly, and then, as you say, the safety mechanisms. So we'll look at what's on the website. Perhaps there's a news release that goes out that you could easily circulate around. More information, the updates, so that you've got all the information on fireworks.
Thanks. And then my second question, just out of curiosity, I know quite some time ago, actually, we received some information that our transit buses had actually been sprayed down with a type of substance that sanitizes it for 3 years. Are we looking at using that type of substance on our park benches, or I don't know if it's possible to be used in those circumstances on benches or other playground equipment?
So we use that similar treatment on all of the facilities that we have. I think we have a concern how effective it is, though, over the longer term in outdoor locations. So it may not have the same effectiveness. But certainly for all of our indoor locations, our buses, all our vehicles, those types of things, that same product has been used.
Okay, great. And then just also on the communication piece there, you know, I'm sure many of you were out this weekend too, and I did see quite a few people sitting on benches, and really, you know, nobody was using any of their own coverings or anything like that. So maybe just a communication piece on that, just to let the public know how often the benches are being cleaned, so that people, if they are using it at their own risk, they can use coverings.
Yeah, no, that's a good suggestion. We'll look into what cleaning, how effective our cleaning is, and if not entirely effective, what precautions the community should be taking. So we'll put that communication together.
And no matter what they do, let's all remember, wash your hands after.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, everybody. Could I have a mover and seconder to receive the report? Councillor Knoll and Councillor Chisholm, any objection to the receipt of the report? Madam Clerk, there is none, and the report is received. We now welcome to the podium Nancy Sully, the Acting Commissioner of Corporate Services, with the COVID-19 financial update.
Can you go to the next slide? Or do I just do it? Okay. Good afternoon. Through you, Mayor Burton. The report before you provides the financial results as at March 31st and does do projections to the end of the year. It also includes information on our capital, our reserves, and our projected results by department, similar to our previous reports. This year, though, the report is a little bit different than in past. On March 31st, we would be typically telling you that things are on track as normal. This year with COVID, there is a significant impact that we're seeing on our finances. Revenue shortfalls are projected to be around $21 million. This is based on the set of assumptions that we laid out for you earlier in the spring when the pandemic first started. And that is that all of the facilities and programs would be closed until the end of June and would begin to reopen at the beginning of July. We also assumed that our revenues over the summer months would be at around 50% of normal levels and would gradually increase to 75% throughout the fall. The part-time students we assumed would be rehired as those programs and services came back online in time for a July opening. And we did assume the tax penalty and interest is waived until the end of the year. So not surprisingly, the biggest hit is on the programs and services that have a large user fee component. And those would include recreation, culture parks with the largest impact of $8.6 million, transit at $3.4 million, all the way down to tax penalty and interest at $2 million. And I just did want to note that on the tax levy report, we recommended waiving, and council did approve the waiving of the penalty and interest to the end of the year. That has a budget impact of $2 million. It has an actual revenue impact of about $2.8 million because we have been exceeding budget over the past few years. And then on other programs, about $1.3 million. The revenue shortfalls have been partially offset by expenditure savings. The large of $7.7 million. The largest component of the savings is in our personnel. That includes gapping savings. We're not filling full-time positions that are vacant unless they're absolutely critical to the organization. and then the difficult decision to lay off our part-time and contract staff. There are savings in materials and supplies and purchased services. They've been partially offset with corporate litigation costs, which we're expecting to exceed budget this year. However, we still expect to see our materials and supplies at about $1 million under budget, and then some other expenditure savings in other areas. This leaves us with a projected net shortfall of $13.4 million for 2020, again, based on the assumptions I outlined earlier. So we have taken several steps to mitigate the impact of this on the town budget. As everyone knows, we must have a balanced budget. We can't end the year in a deficit. The temporary layoff of staff, the redeployment of full-time staff. We also deferred our capital projects. Council approved the deferral of approximately $71 million of 2020 capital projects. That really does help our cash flow this year and helps us to mitigate the impacts of some of the other mitigation measures that we have been offering. We're continuing to control our expenditures, monitoring them very carefully, ensuring that we're only spending where we need to spend, and looking to cut back where appropriate. Council did approve the use of the 2019 surplus to offset the impact this year, and we are using reserves to fund the difference. So in total, the $13.4 million is funded from the surplus, $4.5 million. Our building enterprise reserve will fund the shortfall in building, and we're estimating that at about $1.9 million. And the remainder, the $7 million, would come from our tax stabilization reserve. And I do want to note that even with that $7 million from the reserve, we are still exceeding the GFOA recommended best practice of 17% of gross expenditures in the reserve. So we are in a good place for this year. In addition to the mitigation steps that we have taken to offset the impacts on our budget, there has been several relief measures for taxpayers, for both residents and businesses, and that includes the waiving of tax penalty and interest now until the end of the year, a rent waiver for tenants in town facilities that were closed, those rents have been waived, and a rent deferral program for tenants in town-owned properties. All our program fees were refunded where programs couldn't be offered, and we have been waiving parking fees and transit fares at this time. And now, finally, the delay in the final due dates for the tax bill. To assist residents, the due dates for this year for the final installments will be the end of August and the end of October. Traditionally, they would be the end of June and the end of September. So those relief measures do come at a cost to the town. 40% of our budget comes from sources other than taxation, with 21% coming from user fees, and of course this is the area that has been the hardest hit. Our other revenue sources, including interest and penalties, are being impacted by some of the relief measures for taxpayers, and as well the delay in due dates. So some of those things do affect our interest earnings as well. Looking forward for the remainder of the year, there is significant risk that the impact of COVID will be larger than what we are projecting based on our current assumptions. It may take longer for services to resume to normal levels. As well, we're seeing protocols being released as services return, and the cost of delivering our programs were likely to increase significantly due to those required protocols and possibly reduce demand by residents. Our fees have currently been set based on participation and utilization rates that may not be achievable as we return our services forward. As a result, we're going to need to carefully balance our desire to bring back our services with the impact delivering those services will have on our bottom line. We have to be very careful as we don't want to increase the potential burden on our taxpayers at a time when everyone is feeling pressure. Longer term, there are impacts that will likely be continuing into 2021. As I said, the provincial regulations are impacting the cost of delivering services. We don't know yet what our participation rates or demand will be as services return. Our user fees, right now, we have cost recovery ratios that have been approved by Council in our rates and fee policy. If our participation rates or the cost of delivering services increase, that will have an impact on user fees. If we can't achieve the cost recovery ratio targets, that would shift more of a burden onto the taxpayer. And we have to balance that pressure on the tax levy, as we have to have a balanced budget. So we are developing a plan for 2021. We will be bringing forward more information at the Budget Committee meeting in June and into July. And we do need to continue to seek funding from the federal and provincial government to help offset some of these impacts. I think of one area in particular being transit, where we've had to institute rear door boarding. Transit's an essential service. It's needed for people to get around for the economy, but with no fare collection, it's putting an increased burden on the municipality. And we really do need to look for funding relief from the federal and provincial governments. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I understood Councillor Adams to have a question left over from a previous session, so let's start with him.
Thank you very much. The same question applies. I think it might be 2 slides back in your deck with respect to the tax levy relief, the deferral or the waiving of penalties and interest over an extended period of time. Could you go through that, and could you describe how the town plans to communicate that? I think there was a lot of confusion in the general public about what was allowed and how that was going to be rolled out for them under the original deferral program. Could you describe that for us?
Certainly, through you, Mayor Burton. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. So we will include information in the tax brochure that will go out with the tax bills. We'll also post it on the town website, look to social media. So really, the due dates, we are this time deferring the due dates. So they will be set later than normal to give people more time to pay. We did have 85% pay the April installment on the due date. So that actually is good news for the town, as it provides that much needed revenue. But we are delaying the due dates to August and to October. The waiving a penalty means that while we still, if you can pay on those due dates, we're asking that you do pay, because the town does need that money to pay for the services and programs that are provided to residents. But if residents or businesses are experiencing difficulty, the waiving of the penalty and interest means that they have until the end of the year to make those payments without being penalized or applying penalty at 1.25% per month.
Can you tell us the estimates that you've got in the package with respect to the cost of these measures? Are they based on an assumption of a certain percentage of property owners paying on time? And if so, what's the assumption?
Through you, Mayor Burton, they are. So we typically do have a percentage of residents and businesses that don't pay their taxes on time. We budget $3 million in penalty and interest on taxes. The last few years, we have exceeded that budget by a little bit. So it's been coming in $3.5 million, $3.8 million. So there's always an assumption that some won't pay. We have looked at the experience of April and estimated what we think the impact will be. The fact that right now our budget's $3 million, we have received penalty and interest from January to the end of March of $1 million. So we know the impact on the budget would be a variance of $2 million, as we won't be charging any more penalty and interest.
Okay, thank you very much, and I look forward to the communication materials.
Okay.
The next question. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Nancy, for this. Just so I'm clear, right now the projected net operating variance as of March 34th is 13.4 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So in our regional report, which we received on May 11th, where all municipalities were asked to give their estimates, at that time it was estimated our year-end total projection would be 19 million. So are we way ahead of where we projected just 2.5 weeks ago, or what's the discrepancy there?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that was the revenue shortfall. So we were asked to provide what we thought the revenue shortfall would be. and it is 19 million. We now have added that 2 million for the tax penalty and interest because we did assume the council would approve that. So that brings the revenue shortfall to $21 million, but we have expenditure mitigations of 7 million, bringing it down to that 13.4.
And do we know where we fit in terms of our regional partners at their municipalities? Are we high? Are we low? Are we close? Do you know where we stand in comparison?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'm not 100% sure. We do meet weekly, and I will be meeting with them tomorrow. Burlington did provide results to the end of June. They didn't go to the end of the year. They showed their impacts. One of the things that's a little bit different for us, Burlington may be similar when they do their full year, but one of the things that's a little different for us is our transit. So if you look at Milton or Halton Hills, they're not providing transit service, certainly to the level we are, which means their losses are not going to be as high as ours are.
Okay, and do we know what ours would have been till the end of June then? Do we have a comparable?
I can, through you, Mayor Burton, I can get that for you.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councillor Robertson.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you for the report. Do you see a time when we will again charge for transit and come up with a system where users can be paying?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we are installing, and I'll look to Commissioner Bell in case I get this wrong, but we are installing plexiglass in the buses, which will allow front door boarding and therefore fare collection going forward.
All right, Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Nancy, just for clarification, so we do have assurances from the region as well as the province with respect to the payment that we would be making to them and to for the school board, that's going to happen at the end of the year as well?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the province has deferred their payments to the end of the year, that we know. The region, in consultation with them, they did defer the April installment to the end of June, and they have said that they will, once all of the local municipalities bring their bylaws forward and their due dates, that they would be going to regional council to match with our timing.
So not yet, but eventually. Anyone else? So a motion to receive and a seconder would be in order. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Knoll, any objection? Madam Clerk, no objections are seen, and the report is received. Council, you now have my report. I'd be pleased to take any questions. I don't have a presentation. As you know, quite a lot of what's in my report was in the presentations previously. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much for the report, Mayor Burton. My question is not specifically about the recovery framework. It's partly related to that and partly related to the motion that's coming to us regarding the commercial, what's it called? The commercial recovery initiative. And I just want to have your opinion on how that would apply town-wide for tenants or commercial entities that are operating in the many plazas that we've got all around town. Many of those operations are local businesses owned and operated by local residents. And if you've had, what kind of feedback are you getting from those areas as opposed to only the BIA areas?
Our feedback has been mostly from the BIA areas. And is Dorothy on the line? There she is. I'd like to ask Dorothy St. George to describe the treatment of non-BIA areas.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. The motion that's before you is primarily set out for the commercial districts for the BIAs. That is where we've primarily heard from the restaurants and retailers in those areas. So this was to provide assistance to the commercial areas there. So it's for the commercial areas and for the town-owned lands adjacent to and around the commercial areas. We haven't heard from other retailers at this point in time or restaurants outside the commercial districts, but it's something we could look at as well.
So one of the issues that I'm hearing from my residents is a deep desire to help support the local businesses in their local neighborhoods. And there are many small restaurants and other small companies that they enjoy and they support. They want them to survive and keep going. And there may be cases where, as we move forward, there'll be a need for modifying the way restaurants operate, for example. How many people they're allowed to have in their establishment, whether they're allowed to extend into patio space outside of those areas, for example. And so if we're providing relief on that kind of issue in one part of town, we really need to provide that same kind of relief across town, I think, so that there's a level playing field and that we can help support those local businesses.
I'll take that. The difference here is that this deals with town-owned property, and in a mall or a strip mall, we're not dealing with town property, and so it's really the mall operator or mall owner. But what we're happy to do is for any councillor with such a case to refer it to our economic task force, and we'll then engage with the landlords or the mall owners to make sure that the businesses are getting as much help as we can provide them.
I'm very happy to hear that. I see in the motion that's coming forward to us after this one, part of it includes, for example, that the application fees for requisite approvals associated with the initiative be waived for 2020. I think that there are probably going to be initiatives by some of the operations that are off of town land wanting to make amendments to the way their commercial space gets used. And I think we'll need to consider that as part of what we're doing as well, on a temporary basis anyway.
And we absolutely will.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson?
My question has to go to safety as we reopen and we do things like bring on restaurants or even now with our grocery stores. I've had people concerned that as a grocery store like Sobeys or Metro has had cases and people have asked, do all employees get tested automatically if there is a case of an employee that has tested positive? And the answer right now is no. Is that something in terms of Oakville that we would look at in terms of if there is one case, everyone gets tested? Can we enforce anything like that?
So far, the answers we've had from the public health officials at the region are that if an employee is living outside of Halton, they're covered by a different health district, and and our health district doesn't necessarily know about them in terms of managing them. The Premier's undertaking yesterday, or his strong statement yesterday, that we're going to escalate testing and tracing, and the commitment by the Prime Minister that Canada would fund it, I think looks like a pointer to that part of the game is going to change, and because what the Premier said was, you'll be able to, if you want to be tested, you will be able to go get tested, and so I see relief on that front right in front of us. I know that there is a rationing problem that's still apparently involved in testing around the reagents and the swabs and so on, but new tests are being approved, and that may also bring some relief. But The bottom line is that in the last 2 days, the senior levels of government have done more than signal. They've declared outright that more testing is going to be made available. And we are at this moment, just before council met, up to that moment at 2 o'clock, we hadn't yet heard back, but we are waiting to hear back from Halton's medical officer of health on these questions. So we'll have to like just keep thinking about this one and keep pressing.
Yeah, thank you, because I think that's a big thing, is whether it's, if you want it versus whether it should be mandatory within settings like retail.
Right. The medical officer of health has powers to do that. We don't. But, and so far, you've seen this encouragement versus draconian, orders at the point of a gun, so to speak. So we'll see where we go with this. But there's a consent of the governed thing in a democracy that always kind of operates to attenuate the edge of authority. And everybody knows about it. I'm not giving a secret away. Any others? Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the first thing I'd just like to try and clarify here is what it is. In the report, it's a report to receive, and it's a report to receive the framework. What I'm reading in our emergency bylaw 5.3.1 is that the recommendations and actions of the recovery committee are subject to council approval. So are we receiving this report, or are we approving the framework right now?
You're free to receive it or approve it. It's an evolving document, and so I don't think we need approval yet, but on the understanding that we will continue to improve it, you'd be very welcome to move approval.
Okay, so with that then, I have a couple suggestions, if that's okay, if you'll entertain them. Under the guiding principles, I'd like to see a commitment to community input as much as possible. I know we're limited in what we can do, but again, if you're not in the BIA or you're not in the Chamber of Commerce, as Councillor Adams noted, you might be flying in the wind. And I think it's important that we try to ensure community engagement at all circumstances. I'd also like to see something in the framework where we begin to plan for what most people say is coming as a second wave. And I think that has to be a part of our recovery program, is not just recovering, but also preparing, sort of hand in glove on that one as much as possible. And I'm wondering about, so this document is living. We might be in this recovery phase well into 2021. We don't know right now. I'm wondering about a timeline on how long when we get to see this framework. Does it come back every council as a standing item where we get to discuss? Is it brought back at a certain time frame, or what the parameters around that might be?
The Recovery Committee will report to every council meeting. Okay,
perfect. And lastly, and I know it's been sort of raised a couple of different times by Councillor Haslett-Thiel, by Councillor Parmar. I'm wondering about some sort of formal role for councillors here in a subcommittee. I know under the Recovery Planning Committee, it's at your discretion to form subcommittees and to do that. But I don't know how much longer councillors can sort of sit down and just ring up the phone to give advice. I think there's a role to be played here in some way, shape, or form for some councillors, for whoever wants to be involved. But I'm wondering if you might consider, under your delegated authority as chair of the committee, sort of formally reaching out to involve some councillors on some of these committees.
I'll be glad to consider it. In the meantime, please advise me of particular interest areas where you think you can make the best contribution.
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'll look for a mover and seconder for receipt. Councillor Longo and Councillor Robertson, any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the report is received. Council, the next item is the confidential discussion item on the recreation lease recommendation. I believe this is a relatively non-controversial issue. Councillor Elgar? We just need you to unmute, Councillor Elgar.
I would like to go into camera to discuss this item, please.
All righty. I need a motion by, Councillor Elgar moves that council meet in a session closed to the public for the purpose of considering a matter concerning the property of the municipality. I need a seconder for that, and that's Councillor Dudek. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there is no objection, and council has voted to meet in a session closed to the public. Council, we will have a little pause now while we arrange the next stage of technology for this session. Please stand by. Public, that council is resuming its public session, having met in camera in a session closed to the public for the purpose of considering a matter involving the property and contracts of the city or the town. And in a decision made in camera, it was requested that a recorded vote be established, and that is, of course, a regular part of our procedure. So please raise your hand to be named if you are in support of option 3. This gives you the same list as going through the failed vote. If you see, it's just the reciprocal. So please raise your hand to record your support for option 3. Councillor Lischina, Councillor O'Meara, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Adams, Councillor Robertson, Councillor Grant, and Mayor Burton. And those against, we will record as the rest of you, Councillor Dudek, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Haslett-Deal, Councillor Sandu, and Councillor Longo. So the option 3 carries 8-7. Thank you, everybody. Now we come to the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes to be received. Councillor Giddings, are you moving receipt of the minutes? Councillor Giddings.
Happy to do that, Mr. Mayor. If I could make a brief comment first.
Please do, yes.
First of all, the first virtual meeting, as I mentioned earlier, and as referenced by acting CAO Closey, went extremely well. We were glad to clear the deck of a number of things. And I'm sure my staff, my council colleagues went through the Aircliffe Coach House. It would be remiss of me to not mention that we wouldn't be able to be in a position to have this vote today if it hadn't been for the forward thinking of Mayor Harry Barrett. And I've been thinking a lot about Harry lately, and he would be thrilled with this. And it was his foresight in the 1970s that has made this possible.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Lischina, is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection and the motion is carried. Is there any new business? There is. I know of some notices of motion. And is there any emergency, congratulatory, or condolence matter to come before council? Seeing none, there's a notice of motion from, first before that, council, I believe it's your will to waive the procedure by law in order to adopt these motions today rather than waiting the customary month. So if that is in fact the case, I have a resolution ready that in accordance with section 2, sub 2 of the procedure bylaw, the rules of procedure established in section 14.12 be waived to permit consideration of the following notices of motion upon their introduction today. May I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Knoll and Councillor Adams, raise your hands if there's any objection. Madam Clerk, there is no objection. The measure carries unanimously. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, your notice of motion, seconded by Councillor Chisholm, is first. And I would like to, before I turn the floor over to Councillor Haslett-Thiel, I would like to thank publicly Councillor O'Meara for the spark plugging that he provided to help get this on the boards. The Economic Task Force had a major piece of this, of course, but it really was a major impetus from Councillor O'Meara and the Brawny BIA. And Councillor O'Meara, I know that the merchants of your BIA appreciate very much your strong support for them. So thank you. Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
Mayor Burton preempted me because I also wanted to thank Councillor O'Meara for his dedication to trying to bring the patio issue forward, and on behalf of downtown. I'm hoping to get your unanimous support on this motion. I think it's well drafted, and I won't take credit for the drafting it. We've had help from the Economic Task Force, and we've also had lots of conversations that individuals have had to make sure that what's important to the businesses and how we're going to help the community move forward is identified in this motion. And in particular, some of the words that jump out at me are expediting and the reopening in a safe way. So I would encourage you to support this initiative.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm, I know this is important to the BIA that you serve with. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm having difficulty unmuting. Yes, I'm seconding this motion with respect to the patios. I think it's very important based on the issues we're having at this point in time. And if any way we can help out our restaurants and so forth, I think is a good move. And I am in full support of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much. I fully support the motion. And as I said earlier today, I'd like to make sure that when we're doing things like providing marketing campaigns, that we're considering businesses across town that are local in nature and the need to support them as well. Can we make sure that that occurs?
Yes, sir. The Economic Task Force is fully focused on all of our businesses, not just the 3 BIAs.
Thank you so much.
Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the kind words. From what we hear in some of the jurisdictions that are opening up is restaurants are only going to be allowed about a 25% occupancy rate. When you speak with restaurateurs, those numbers don't add up to keep a successful business. Many are already facing closure, and expectations could be anywhere from 70 to 80% of closures with these. So they need these types of resources. They need to expand their footprint in order to protect the health and safety of the patrons, of people walking by, and to ensure that they can still run a successful business model. So I think this gets us there. I think the term that we've been floating around is help us get to yes, and what the businesses need to do, let's try and help them get to yes, and I think this will do that. So thank you to yourself, Your Worship, and Councillor Haslett-Thiel and Chisholm for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. If there's any opposition to this measure, please show by raising your hand. Madam Clerk, there is no opposition, and I would ask that we record, since it's unanimous, I would ask that we record the vote as everyone voting by name for it, and that'll save you the time, but your support is recognized as a result. The next item is the notice of motion for expanded COVID-19 testing capacity, moved by Councillor Giddings and seconded by Councillor Lischina. Councillor Giddings?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Lischina are bringing this motion forward in an effort to update our residents and to show our support of the increased COVID testing announced by the Premier over the last couple of days. We welcome the Prime Minister's offer to help with testing. We appreciate that our Premier is most anxious to have the number of tests increased, and we are looking forward to learning the details of the provincial government's initiative in terms of resources that will allow for this increased testing to occur. We also would appreciate a recorded vote on this, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll do that. I'll offer to do it the same way I just did it, if that's satisfactory. Councillor Lischina, your turn.
I'm pleased to support Councillor Giddings' motion. I think it's important if we've got the opportunity to increase our testing, as it's critical to define what type of virus variants there are and in the types of populations. Testing will provide both public health and the research community the ability to study the genetics, the developmental, environmental cofactors that affect the severity of the disease. So I think epidemiology is very important, and this will allow us to know much more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duddick?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the mover and the seconder. Have either of you spoken to the Regional Health Department in regards to this motion?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I haven't. The region has, we've received some information from our CIO over the weekend. The region has updated their webpage as of today, and it's they're still referring everyone to seek not to attend the hospital, to call, and when you call, they'll get back to you within a day or so. I think the intent of the Premier of Ontario is to allow people to attend whether they're showing symptoms or not. From the information we received from the CAO of the Halton region, I believe that she will be getting back to us in terms of those further details.
Okay, the reason for my asking is I've done a bit of research on this, because when we were talking previously about securing our numbers and the testing, and which is a huge component, and I agree with the majority of what's being outlined here in the motion. What I have a problem with is the second whereas from the bottom, where it says, whereas Premier Doug Ford has encouraged local public health units to pick up the pace and increase provincial testing levels. Well, the local public health department only does long-term care and child care. They're not responsible. The province and the feds are, but mostly the province through the Ministry of Health. So, and I get that you're just quoting him, but I think it's misleading to the public that they think that the Halton region hasn't been picking up the pace, so to speak, because they're not responsible. The province is responsible, and the location of these assessment centers are all going to be coming as a result of the province directing us where they are, how they'll be funded. So that, just wanted to put that on the books.
No, I appreciate that, Councillor Duddick. It's not directed as criticism in any manner or any form towards anybody. I'm sure all of us here today have been receiving numerous phone calls and questions saying we need to get tested. We haven't heard back. I think I may have it. I haven't passed the screening regimen. And as Councillor Chinna said, it's through identification that will assist us in terms of getting through this.
Okay, but I would respectfully suggest that that whereas is misleading because you have named the public health unit as being the one to pick up the pace. And so all the other information, yes, sharing it with the town, sharing it with the public health for us to identify what areas are the hotspots. But I have a problem naming public health, and I get that you're quoting the Premier, but I don't think I want to support anything that indicates that our public health department is not doing their job.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings? Councillor Giddings, somehow or other you're muted.
Yes, obviously I'd like for everybody to be able to support it. And so would you feel better able to support it if instead of encouraging public health units to pick up the pace, something along the lines of encouraging public health units to be able to increase provincial testing levels?
Councillor, could I make a friendly suggestion? What if you change it to, whereas Premier Doug Ford has promised an increase in provincial testing levels?
Perfect. Councillor Duddick?
We turned a frown upside down. That's good. Councillor Elgar, I think, is next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Yeah, I was going back to the email we received from the Halton Regional CIO, Jane McCaskill, where it was coming from the province, from, Matthew Anderson, President CEO of Ontario Health, saying who would be tested. So it has nothing to do with a regional health unit at all. It is specifically the province. So with what you've done now, changing the whereas of Doug Ford, you have hit the sweet spot. So we're not throwing Halton Regional Public Health under the bus. So I commend you for that. So I think that's good because we are not responsible, and it's good the way it looks now. I like how it rolls. So, and it really fits with what we've got the assessment center leaders are saying, and it's from the Ontario Health Minister. And I'll take information from him as factual instead of any politician that is not a medical health expert. So I thank you.
You're welcome. The next hand that I can remember seeing is Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would support the revised motion. As Councillor Elgar mentioned, there is Matt Anderson has come out. There is going to be a new testing protocol that will be provincial-wide that's coordinated between all the public health agencies as well as the labs that actually do the testing. And there'll be a phase eventually to go into blood testing to try and look at antibodies. So there's a couple phases here, but truly the province is trying to ramp up testing across all communities. So I think the amendment, I would support the revised amendment.
Thank you. May I put the vote? Anyone who wants to register an objection to the motion, please raise your hand or otherwise signal to me. Madam Clerk, a recorded vote was requested, and in light of the successful use of this method, the previous one, would you please record in the minutes that by name, every member of council present has voted for the motion. Is that satisfactory, council? Thank you, everybody. All right, that allows us to move to the next one, and we go back to Councillor Haslett-Deal and Councillor Sanju for increasing student work experience opportunities. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I approached this topic and with the support of Jasvinder and several others, began to explore some frustration that was coming my way from students and parents. And the phrase that was often used in conversation is, "This will be a lost summer," and that students are anxious. They ended their term online. They're going to begin their next post-secondary term online, and losing a summer of work experience is significant. So the purpose of this is, while I applaud the offering of the Canada Student Benefit by the federal government, we need the federal government to bring clarity to a key question. Can a student volunteer on a part-time basis with a business or a not-for-profit and keep their Canada Student Benefit? Can a business offer a safe, voluntary, part-time internship or work placement, enabling students and businesses to work together and still have the student qualify for the student benefit? Additionally, I want to call on the government to provide the details for the Canada Student Service and the Canada Service Corps, because the clock is ticking. They've been done school in April. We're coming to the end of May. We do not know if those programs will offer young people the kind of support that this motion suggests. And I think it's incumbent upon us to keep young people engaged and supported, doing what they've told parents and the community they want, which is they need to get the work experience. And I'd hope that you would support the spirit and intent of this, which is to raise the conversation about how do we bring, the beauty of helping businesses with the key factor, which is helping students get valuable work experience as they start on the path to growing their careers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Just echoing Councillor Haslett-Beal's comments and thanking our councillor colleagues for helping us in this, in drafting this motion. The benefits available from the federal government are many. I think that from a personal perspective, I know all too well what it's like to graduate or be a student during an economic crisis, and that's really where we're headed here. We would be remiss if we were not taking into the account how students and graduates are feeling right now, and the lack of resources and the lack of positions available to them. By allowing them this voluntary time, we would be providing them, or the government would help to provide them with essential resources and tools for them to continue with their work experience and gather that experience for now. And this is really our ask to the government, the federal government, in helping support our local communities and our students and people that are going to be viable resources and important resources for our economic development in the future.
Thank you very much for that. Are there other speakers? Seeing none, please raise your hand if you wish to show objection to the motion. Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and I would ask you to record all members by name as I'm in effect calling for a recorded vote. So thank you for that. Council, we now have before us a request for a report from Councillor Dudek and Councillor Chisholm, and that is that staff report back to Council on the possible options to increase to address the concerns of the Walker Street residents as they relate to the pathway lighting, including consideration to turn the lights off at 11 p.m. each night, dimming lights to a safe level prior to 11 p.m., and painting the 3 arms on each fixture matte black. Is there any objection to ordering this report? Please raise your hand if there is. Madam Clerk, there's no objection showing, and the request is approved. The next request for report is moved by Councillor Adams and seconded by Councillor Lischina, that staff report on what the stormwater management standards are for ditches and culverts in residential areas, including the design standards for depth, width, and slope of ditches, the accepted materials in ditches such as plantings, stones, or retaining walls, the process for property owners to make any changes to adjacent ditches, as well as water retention and conveyance standards for ditches, and that staff update the Town of Oakville website to include this information in a user-friendly and accessible format, and that staff report on options such as the use of a standard leaflet distributed to property owners to improve proactive communications about the town's standards, maintenance plans, and upcoming works for stormwater ditches and culverts, particularly on residential streets, including for regular inspections. Please raise your hand to show any opposition to ordering this report. Madam Clerk, there's no opposition, and the report is approved. The request for report is approved. Council, that brings us to the consideration and reading of bylaws. Councillor Dudek, thank you for moving the bylaws. Councillor Longo, thank you for seconding. This is the authority for the bylaws as listed in the agenda. Please raise your hands to show opposition to the motion. Madam Clerk, there's no opposition and the bylaws are adopted. And this includes, by the way, the bylaw that was enacted pursuant to bylaw 2020-57, getting hoarse here, the COVID-19 emergency delegation bylaw, which was the one to authorize electronic meetings of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee during COVID-19 emergency. My friends, we have finished our agenda and all the work that can come before us. Thank you very much for your time and attention and your many fine contributions and the respectful way we discuss things together. It's been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.